The Harrington Estates annual trust review was held every year in the glass-walled boardroom of Harrington and Associates on the 14th floor of the Viaduct Harbour Tower in Auckland. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the Waimata, and on a clear morning like this one, you could see all the way to Rangitoto. My cousin Declan had arrived early, as he always did when there was something to perform. He'd arranged the chairs, fanned out the documents, and positioned the name placards with the kind of theatrical precision that said everything about who he believed this meeting belonged to. He didn't look up when I walked in. Mia. He said my name the way you'd say the word MISC on a spreadsheet filed, dismissed, moved past. There's a breakout room on level 12. Catering's set up down there for the overflow. This floor's for the principals today. I was wearing a navy blazer I'd bought in London the previous autumn, tailored to the shoulder, the kind of cut that doesn't announce itself but doesn't apologize either. Under my arm was a slim folder. Inside that folder was a single document that would rewrite everything Declan thought he knew about this morning. Principals? I said. He finally looked up. Something between a smile and a smirk settled on his face. People with an actual stake in the outcome, Mia. You know how Grand's trust works. The advisory shares don't carry voting weight. He adjusted a place card his own, positioned at the head of the table. It's not personal. It's just structure. My Aunt Helena was standing near the windows, coffee in hand, watching the harbor. She turned just enough to acknowledge me. We've got a lot to cover today, she said pleasantly. Why don't you head down and get yourself sorted? We'll loop you in for the social part after. The social part. The part with the sandwiches and the small talk and the carefully managed nothing. I didn't argue. I thanked them both and walked back to the lift. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that 3 weeks earlier, the final tranche of a private acquisition had cleared. Taupō Capital, the investment group I'd built quietly over the past 6 years, now held a controlling interest in the Harrington Family Trust. Not advisory shares, not legacy shares, controlling interest. 53%. Structured through a series of acquisitions, my legal team had spent 14 months threading together with the kind of patience that doesn't announce itself. My grandmother had approved it herself, 6 months before she passed. She was the only one who knew. I rode the lift down to level 12, walked past the catering table without stopping, found a seat near the window, and opened my laptop. I had work to do before I went back upstairs. My grandmother's name was Margaret Harrington, though she'd been born Margaret Toho before she married, and she never entirely forgot it. She built the original Harrington Trust from her own earnings, a modest investment portfolio in the 1980s that she grew, with a discipline her husband's family never quite understood or credited. By the time I was old enough to sit beside her at the kitchen table in Remuera, she was already managing assets. Her son, my uncle, Clifford, had long assumed were his to inherit. She used to say, "The person who signs the check is rarely the one whose name is on the door, Mia. Remember that." I remembered it every single day. I was 27 when I left the Harrington family office. I'd spent 3 years there after university, doing exactly what was asked of me: financial modeling, stakeholder reports, market analysis. I was good at it. Declan was 2 years older and had been positioned since childhood as the heir apparent, not because he was more capable, but because he was louder about it, and because he was male, and because the family had always confused confidence with competence. The thing that ended it for me wasn't any one incident. It was a morning in the boardroom when I presented a 12-month growth strategy I'd built entirely on my own time, and Clifford listened with polite disinterest and then turned to Declan and asked what he thought. Declan hadn't read it. He summarized it back incorrectly. Clifford nodded like wisdom had arrived. I handed in my notice the following week. My grandmother called me that evening. She didn't try to talk me out of it. "Good," she said simply. "Now go build something of your own." She transferred a portion of her personal holdings to me the same month, not from the trust, from her own accounts, money she'd set aside specifically so that I'd have a foundation no one could vote away. She made me promise 2 things: that I'd use it ethically, and that I'd be patient. "Don't come back until you're ready," she said. "And when you come back, make it count." I named the company Taupō Capital, after the lake she'd taken me to every summer as a child. She thought it was sentimental. She was right. Over the following 6 years, I built it from that foundation into something that the financial pages occasionally mentioned in passing, but never fully understood. We didn't court press. We didn't go to industry dinners. We invested in sustainable infrastructure, ethical supply chains, regional development projects in places that larger funds ignored. Our returns were consistent, and our reputation, among the people who mattered, was quietly excellent. And then, 18 months ago, my grandmother called me again. "There's a conversation I need to have with you," she said. "In person, and soon." She died in November. The morning after her funeral, her personal solicitor contacted me and confirmed what she'd outlined in our last meeting. The final acquisition had been structured, the documents had been signed, and Taupō Capital was now the majority holder of the Harrington Family Trust, under terms she had personally authorized and executed without informing any other family member. She left a letter with her solicitor, addressed to me. It said, "I've watched this family mistake performance for substance for 40 years. You are the only one who understood what I was actually building. Don't let them undo it. Lead them properly, even if they resist. Especially if they resist." I read it twice, folded it carefully, and put it in the inside pocket of my coat. Then I went to work. Level 12 was quiet. APA walked past the breakout room twice, both times glancing in with the slightly sympathetic expression people adopt when they assume you've been sidelined. I didn't correct the assumption. I had my laptop, a strong flat white, and a live feed of the trust's current asset performance. Taupō's legal team had positioned everything perfectly. The proxy documentation had been lodged. The board alignment was confirmed. My financial director, Priya, had sent a message at 7 that morning. All instruments confirmed. Harrington board majority secured. Waiting on your word. I typed back. Hold. Let it run a little longer. I could hear the meeting above me. Not literally, but I knew its rhythm. Declan would be presenting his vision for the trust's next 5 years, a strategy I'd already reviewed, because a copy had been filed with the trust's administrative office, and Taupō Capital's legal team had full access. It was exactly what I'd expected. Aggressive short-term returns, divestment from the sustainability projects my grandmother had championed, and a restructure that would consolidate decision-making authority around Declan and Helena at the expense of the smaller stakeholders. It was a smart strategy if your only goal was to entrench your own position. It was a disastrous strategy if your goal was to actually grow anything that lasted. My phone rang. It was my legal director, James. "They've just moved to the resolution vote," he said. "How's the mood in the room?" Clifford looks confident. Helena's presenting like she already knows the outcome. Declan's a brief pause. Declan's using a lot of words. I almost smiled. "Give me 10 minutes. We'll be ready." I closed my laptop, straightened my blazer, picked up my folder, and took the lift back up to 14. I didn't knock. The Harrington Trust boardroom had a set of wide glass doors, and I pushed them open and walked in with the same energy you'd use to enter a room you'd booked yourself. Every head turned. Declan was standing at the head of the table, mid-sentence, one hand gesturing toward a slide on the wall screen. He stopped. He looked at me the way you look at something that shouldn't be where it is. "Mia." He said my name again, same tone as before, but with something new underneath it now, a thin wire of uncertainty. "This is a closed session. Principals only, as I mentioned." "I know," I said. I walked toward the table and set my folder down near the center. "That's actually why I'm here." Helena set her coffee down slowly. Clifford's expression hadn't moved, but his eyes had. "What are you doing?" Declan asked. His voice was still controlled, but the performance had slipped a fraction. "I'm calling a point of order," I said, "before you proceed to the resolution vote." I opened my folder and slid a document to the center of the table. Taupō Capital holds 53% of the Harrington Family Trust as of 3 weeks ago. The acquisition was authorized by Margaret Harrington in her personal capacity as the trust's founding settler. Full documentation has been lodged with the trust's solicitors, and our proxy votes have been formally registered. The room went absolutely still. It wasn't dramatic silence like in films, where someone gasps and a glass tips over. It was the specific silence of a room full of people who have just had their understanding of reality quietly adjusted. Clifford's hand, resting on the table, went very still. Helena's eyes moved to Declan, then back to me, then to the document. Declan himself looked at the page, and I watched the calculation run behind his eyes, the search for the flaw, the exit, the counter. He looked up. That's not possible. Gran would never. She did, I said. 6 months before she died. She walked me through the full structure herself and signed every instrument in the presence of her solicitor and 2 independent witnesses. I kept my voice level. Not cold, not triumphant, just accurate. She wanted the trust managed by someone who understood what it was originally built for. You were supposed to be in the overflow room, Helena said. It came out confused rather than aggressive, which I thought was telling. I know, I said. I used the time well. Clifford spoke for the first time. His voice was low and very careful. Mia. He was choosing his words the way you'd choose footing on uncertain ground. If what you're saying is true, I can have James on the phone in 30 seconds, if you'd like him to walk you through the instrument structure, I said. Or we can take a short recess, and you can call your own solicitor. I'd actually recommend that. This is a significant development, and you should have independent counsel in the room before we proceed. Declan pushed back from the table. Not loudly. Just the chair shifting backward a few centimeters, the small retreat of someone reassessing. This is a takeover, he said. That's what this is. It's a succession, I said. There's a difference. A takeover is hostile. This was authorized by the person who built everything you're sitting in this room to divide up. I paused and let that land. Gran didn't leave it to chance. She made a decision, and she made it legally, and she made it about 18 months ago, when she could see exactly where this trust was heading without intervention. I placed a second document on the table. This is Taupō Capital's proposal for the trust's next 5-year cycle. The board composition will be restructured. There's a pathway for everyone in this room to retain their equity positions, but operational decisions will go through Taupō's framework going forward. Declan laughed. It was the kind of laugh that doesn't contain any humor. You can't walk in here with a folder and take over a 40-year family trust, Mia. The trust's founding solicitor disagrees, I said. So does its majority shareholder. I met his eyes steadily. Which is me. Clifford called a recess. I stepped outside to the corridor and stood near the window while the family collected themselves inside. Priya rang within minutes. They're calling their solicitors, she said. Harrington's firm is already on it. Good. That's what they should do. How are you holding up? I looked out at the harbor. Rangitoto was sharp in the morning light, sitting low and dark against the blue. I thought about my grandmother at her kitchen table in Remuera, patient and precise, and completely uninterested in the opinions of people who hadn't done the work. Fine, I said. I'm fine. James wants to know if you want him to come up. Please. While I waited, the door opened and Helena came out. She didn't have her coffee this time. She looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her before. Uncertain, a little tired, and something underneath that might have been respect, or might have been grief. Possibly both. I didn't know, she said. I know you didn't. Did Clifford? No. Gran was very deliberate about keeping this between herself and me. Helena was quiet for a moment. She was always the smartest person in any room she walked into, she said. We all knew it. I think some of us just chose not to act like it. I didn't respond to that. There wasn't anything useful to add. What does this actually mean for us? She asked. The family. It means the trust survives, I said. Which, if you look at the actual asset trajectory over the last 3 years, wasn't guaranteed under the current direction. I wasn't saying it to wound her. I was saying it because it was true, and because she was smart enough to hear it. Taupō's proposal protects everyone's equity. What it changes is who makes the operational calls, and how. And you make those calls now. With a board. Yes. She nodded slowly. Looked back toward the boardroom. Declan's not going to take this easily. I know. He's going to say you manipulated Gran. He's welcome to take it to the courts, I said. The documentation is clean. The witnesses are credible. And his own solicitor, when he actually reads the instruments, is going to tell him exactly that. She looked at me then, with the full weight of someone recalibrating. You planned this over years. Gran planned it over decades, I said. I just carried it forward. When we reconvened an hour later, the dynamic in the room had shifted in the way that rooms shift when everyone has spoken to a lawyer, and the lawyers have all said the same thing. Declan was still in his chair, but his posture had changed. The folder he'd been presenting from earlier was closed. The slide was still on the wall, but nobody was looking at it. The Harrington family's own solicitor, a measured man named Gerald, who'd been managing the trust for 15 years, cleared his throat and confirmed that the documentation was valid, the acquisition had been properly executed, and Taupō Capital was, legally and operationally, the trust's majority holder. Declan sat very still. She went behind all of us, he said. It wasn't quite an accusation. It was quieter than that. The voice of someone who has learned something about a person they thought they knew. She went ahead of all of you, I said. Not harshly. She could see what was coming. She made a plan. That's what she always did. And what about what we built? Clifford asked. His voice, for the first time, was without its usual authority. He sounded like someone asking a genuine question rather than framing one. I gave 30 years to this trust. I know you did, I said. And I meant it. Taupō's proposal keeps the Harrington name on everything. The equity stakes stay. What changes are the governance practices and the strategic direction? I looked at him directly. Grand sustainability projects the ones that were earmarked for divestment under the proposal on that slide. They stay. They expand, actually. Because they've been quietly returning better margins than the short-term positions, and our analysts have the data to show it. I pushed the proposal across the table. Take the weekend, I said. Read it properly. Get your own people to go through it. I'm not asking for a decision today. Gerald cleared his throat. There is the matter of the pending resolution vote, which doesn't carry without a majority, I said. And the majority is Taupō's. So we can set that aside. I kept my tone even. This doesn't need to be adversarial. That's not what Gran wanted, and it's not what I want. But it does need to be honest, and it does need to be different from what's been happening. Clifford was looking at the proposal. He wasn't reading it yet, but he was looking at it. That was something. Declan pushed his chair back and stood. He didn't say anything. He picked up his own folder and walked out. The door didn't slam. He had too much composure for that, and I understood it, because composure is the last thing that stays when everything else has gone. I felt something in my chest watching him leave. Not satisfaction, exactly. More like the hollow recognition that winning something doesn't necessarily feel the way you imagined it would. Helena stood slowly. She looked at me for a moment, then at the document on the table. I'll read it, she said. And I'll talk to him. Thank you, I said. What followed in the months after that morning was not a clean transformation. It was complicated and slow, and, in places, genuinely difficult. Declan didn't engage for the first 6 weeks. He consulted 3 separate legal teams, all of whom confirmed what Gerald had already told him. He was entitled to challenge the acquisition, and he could see there was no viable challenge. In the 7th week, he called me himself. The conversation was brief and careful, like 2 people feeling their way through a dark room. He asked one question. Was there anything I could have done differently that would have changed her decision? It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to me. Probably not the structural decision, I told him, but maybe the reasons behind it. I wasn't trying to be cruel. She didn't distrust you, December. She just knew what Taupō was set up to do, and she believed in it. He was quiet for a long moment. She always talked about you differently, he said finally. I told myself it was because you were the one who left, that it was guilt. He paused. It wasn't guilt, was it? No, I said. It wasn't. He came to the first governance session the following week. He didn't take the head of the table. He sat 2 seats down and listened more than he spoke, which, for Declan, was its own kind of transformation. Over the months that followed, he found his footing in a different way. He was a skilled communicator, and that had real value in the trust's stakeholder relationships. When we set up a regional engagement program to work with iwi communities on 2 of the trust's land holdings, Declan led the consultation process. He was good at it in ways the boardroom had never fully used. Helena turned out to be the most practical of all of them. She had always understood numbers better than she'd been given credit for, and when she finally had access to the full strategic picture, rather than the curated version Clifford had been sharing, she came alive in the analysis work. She joined the investment committee within 3 months. Clifford was the longest road. He stepped back from active management and spent the first few months in a kind of withdrawn dignity, turning up to meetings but not fully present in them. It was Helena who told me, over coffee one morning, that he was struggling less with the loss of control and more with the question of whether his 30 years had meant anything. I asked if I could speak with him privately. We met at my office in Taupō Capital's building, a converted warehouse in Tamaki that looked from the outside like nothing in particular and felt, from the inside, like something carefully made. He sat across from me at a long wooden table and looked around at the space with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Margaret always said you'd do something real," he said. "She said the same about you," I told him. "In the beginning." He looked at his hands. "I let it become about position. I know that now." He wasn't asking for absolution. He was just accounting for something. She tried to tell me, several times. I thought she was being sentimental. "She was being clear," I said. "She was always clear." Yes. He was quiet. She was. I slid a folder across the table. "There's a role in this structure that nobody's playing yet," I said. "The trust has 40 years of relationship history in sectors and regions that our team doesn't have personal access to. That knowledge is valuable, but only if someone who holds it is willing to share it with people who will use it differently than it's been used before." I met his eyes. "I think that person is you, if you're willing." He didn't answer straight away. He opened the folder and read for several minutes. When he looked up, something in his face had settled. Not defeated. Different, like a person who has put down something heavy and is recalibrating to their own weight. "All right," he said. A year later, the Trust's sustainability projects had returned 12% above the previous year's performance. The regional land program had received recognition from the Waitemata Community Foundation. Taupō Capital's involvement had been profiled in 2 financial publications, both of which focused on the governance model rather than the ownership structure, which was how I preferred it. There was a family dinner in the lead-up to the next annual review, not in a boardroom, in my grandmother's house in Remuera, which had been left to the trust and which we'd been slowly restoring. Helena had organized it. Declan brought wine and was the first to arrive. I stood in the kitchen before anyone else came through, looking at the window seat where my grandmother used to sit with her accounts spread across her lap, reading glasses perched, completely absorbed and completely at ease. I thought about the 12-year-old version of me who used to sit beside her and watch, not understanding most of it, but absorbing something wordless and important. The understanding that serious work done quietly is still serious work. That patience is not the same thing as passivity. That the people who move slowly and carefully through a system often end up holding it. Priya rang as I was standing there. "Have you seen the latest quarterly figures?" she asked. "I have." "Your grandmother would have loved them. She would have said they were a start." A short laugh from her end. "She would have, yes." The door opened. Clifford came in first, followed by Helena, then Declan. They moved through the hallway with the slightly careful ease of people who have found a new way of being with each other. Not effortless, but genuine. "Ready?" Declan called through to the kitchen. I came out to meet them. "Always," I said. I don't tell this story for any kind of applause. I tell it because I know what it feels like to carry something for years without being able to show it, to walk into rooms where the assumptions have already been made, to be handed the wrong name and the wrong seat, and the wrong level of the building, and to understand that correcting it in that moment would cost more than it would gain. Patience is not always intuitive. When someone underestimates you, every instinct says, respond immediately. Make them see it now. Prove the thing right now. But there is a different kind of power in choosing the moment, in doing the work in silence, in building so carefully and so completely that when you finally walk into the room, there is nothing left to argue. My grandmother taught me that, not in lectures, not in formal lessons, in the way she sat with her accounts at the kitchen window, entirely unbothered by anyone who failed to understand what she was doing. If you're carrying something that no one else can see yet, don't let their blindness become your doubt. The work is real even when the recognition isn't. Legacy is rarely given. It is almost always made, quietly, in rooms that no one thinks to look in. Sometimes the most powerful place to be is the one they sent you to because they didn't think it mattered. It always matters. Keep building.